Okay, welcome to our second episode of Retail Innovation Podcast. I've got two guests, or two co-hosts with me. Ralph, who wasn't on the first episode we did, and then Rob, for continuity from the first episode here. So maybe Ralph, you start, and then Rob, you introduce yourself as the co-host for the Retail Innovation Podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Craig. It's an absolute delight to be here, and I think it's such an exciting time to be talking about retail innovation. I've spent 25 years in retail, and I've seen so much in terms of the early days of the dot-com boom. I've spent time working with retailers like Selfridges and so many that have gone past, like Arcadia and Debenhams in the early days. I spent a lot of time with Mothercare as well as BHS, and in the later years I spent a lot of time out in the Middle East with large groups like Landmark, Altair, Chalhoub, and also out in Australia with the Woolworths Group and a bunch of their subsidiaries. And I've implemented everything from supply chain systems to store systems to planning systems, and I have never found a more exciting moment than what we're experiencing in retail now, because obviously AI has breathed life into every aspect of the consumer experience. And I'm actually working with a very exciting technology right now that actually threatens to completely change the physical retail experience. And I'll be sharing a bit more on the show about that. And so my current obsession is really scanning everything to do with AI and how it's actually going to, how it is in fact changing the retail experience. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing more of that.
And so the stuff you've worked on, Ralph, I call that the kind of the left-hand side of retail, if you think left to right. And the right-hand side was where I met Rob for the first time, which is the selling. And so that's the particularly digital and e-commerce. And that's, Rob, you've spent a lot of time there, haven't you, in your retail career, which is as long as ours, I think, roughly. You and I have got less hair than Ralph, but we're kind of roughly the same age.
Yeah. So I started off in website development effectively before I landed myself in e-commerce, because e-commerce was growing at the time at a rapid rate. It was a very brand new kind of technology. So I've ridden that wave basically my entire career, building, as we talked about before, Craig, made to measure kind of curtains and blind experiences. I've done that for Next, did it for Laura Ashley, did it for BHS as it was before, lots of the kind of stalwarts of UK retail, done plenty of in-store stuff as well. But I find retail an incredibly exciting industry still, right? There are plenty of other industries that I find interesting, but sometimes a little bit boring. Retail for me has always been just a lot more exciting and fast moving. And also the idea that the retailers continually run on quite a small budget and yet get an incredible amount accomplished is always impressive compared to, say, financial services. Huge budgets, but sometimes a lot of that just gets wasted, right? Retail, it can't be wasted, you'll be dead. So no, really exciting time, glad to be here.
Yeah, and thank you very much. I echo that. It is the most exciting industry. I was forced into retail though, so I to get my pocket money I had to work in my dad's shops, which became the largest independent cycling retailer in Europe, Evans Cycles. So I was forced into that, but I was much more of a technology guy. So I've ended up almost my entire career working in retail technology, and it's how I first met both of you, through working first of all with Ralph in 2006, working on a global sourcing project at Tesco. I was a supplier, brought in the software, and Ralph was trying to implement our kind of half-finished software across Tesco, across all the sourcing hubs, across the non-food business. And then Rob, after that, I moved to NS, and then worked with Rob, where I did an RFP or RFI, I'd say, to Rob on made to measure furnishings, before we ended up deciding actually to not do that and re-platform the entire M&S.com. So yeah, my experience, I work at Salesforce now, but my experience has been technology side of retail all the way through. My brother is a retail kind of commercial guy. He's an MD of a very fast growing beauty brand called Trini London. For those that are familiar with Trini Woodall and What Not to Wear, that program in the 90s. That's the business that he's running now. But yes, the format of the show, as before, is what we're going to do is we're going to talk about general purpose technology, which Ralph's going to intro, because Ralph we have a sister show called, what do we call the show now? The Bleeding Edge podcast, which has got quite a few episodes recorded now, which talks about emerging technology across all industries. And Ralph lives and breathes that, almost records an episode every week, and Ralph's going to talk about the stories Then we'll the kind of general purpose technology stories, and then we'll get into applications of of technology in retail specifically. And then finally, we're going to do a deep dive topic into Nexite, which is one of the kind of the many innovative solutions for inventory in supply chain and stores. Without further ado, Ralph, do you want to just give us a kind of rattle through the kind of the top stories over the last 4 weeks that you've seen in technology? I know a lot of them will be AI because that is the kind of the big news story, but what have you seen this last 4 weeks?
Yeah, I think what's really stood out is just the strength of Anthropic, and obviously especially their Claude Code solution that has now hit something like 2.5 billion in turnover with basically subscription services and API services. So it means that enterprise is well and truly adopting Anthropic. They have just passed the 1 trillion valuation, and I think some of the things that they're bringing out, especially around application and technology design, actually building on their significant automation capabilities, the fact that they're now also releasing the ability to run agents in parallel, so anybody will have access to this technology. And this is really exciting, I think, for retailers in particular. I have been working with a sourcing business over the last 6 months that is just desperately trying to automate the basics of Excel. And so when you look at what Anthropic have built with Claude Cowork and with Claude Code, the opportunity to actually just automate updating information in Excel is quite incredible. And sometimes we get very excited by all of these stories of amazing technologies, but from what I see, retail is still run on Excel. And so the actual opportunity for businesses to automate using technology from Anthropic and specifically Claude Cowork and Claude Code, I think is very exciting. That's really going from strength to strength. The other thing that I've seen in this last week is also Meta actually coming out with an interesting new project, really. They're calling it Hatch. It's also actually running on Anthropic's Claude Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.6. And this is basically going to be a tool that you can use to hunt product. And the promise is that it's going to launch in Q4 2026. And basically the idea is, if I just read out the little overview, it's friction collapse, discovery to purchase, compressing from see reel to tap the ad to land on the site to check out. So a single tap with an agent finishing the job. And obviously this is something that is hugely kind of exciting because the ability to start to monetize Instagram at even greater scale and make it even easier to shop. And I think obviously the big shift that we're all anticipating is the disintermediation of websites. What is to become of the websites going forward if you are actually buying from within the search results of the LLM, or indeed you're actually just using, Meta's capability on Instagram, using this new Hatch tool to actually do your buying. And obviously that means that, even Amazon has to start thinking about what value it's bringing with its behemoth, massive catalog, and whether Rufus, its agent, can actually, provide enough value for customers to keep coming back, that will remain to be seen. So I think this Hatch, technology looks like it's going to be a really big play for Meta. In some other news, I think maybe a little bit further removed in terms of direct retail, actually something that you were probably the first to uncover, but another story I covered on the podcast today was Subquadratic. So these guys are a technology company that were in stealth mode up until about a week ago, and basically they have launched a product called SubQ. Now, why is this even worth talking about? Well, they've got a 12 million token native context. So that means you can pretty much load entire code bases into this thing. You can load an entire catalog of e-commerce products into this thing, and it won't run out of context. And I think that really changes the way that we're going to be doing research, the way that we're going to be actually building knowledge bases, potentially even the way that we will be doing shopping. Because imagine if you have a service that has basically loaded every product related to the category that you're looking at, and this thing is able to come back with answers lightning fast because it has this enormous context window. So I think a lot of people are thinking of it in terms of what it could do for coding. I'm really thinking of it, what could it do in terms of really understanding an entire category worth of product. So those are some of the big stories that have come out. I think maybe the other one that's worth just also touching on is, we have seen that Microsoft have now actually registered something at like 37 billion in AI-driven revenue. They have something like 20 million Copilot users. And if you're in retail, you are probably using Microsoft to actually provision most of your desktop applications. And you might even have a Copilot license that you are using. The problem with Copilot has been, it's been a little crap, to be honest. And Microsoft have somewhat struggled, which must be music to your ears, Craig, given you compete with them on certain features. But they have now basically started the divorce with OpenAI. So you will start to see that they're actually going to be releasing their own models. And we might even start to see that they open up the multi-LLM experience, much like Apple is doing with their products. So in Apple, they have announced that you will be able to pick any model you want with Apple. So you'll be able to use Gemini from Google, you'll be able to use Claude from Anthropic, you'll be able to use ChatGPT. And so I think that's a really interesting play from an Apple point of view, because they are really owning the consumer hardware experience when it comes to AI, and actually opening up to those other models is a little bit different from their strategy in the past. And I think that's going to really play into the continued adoption and obsession that people have for Apple's products. So that's my news roundup. Did you find anything interesting in that list?
Yeah, one question about model usage, and I know, Rob, you've got practical. You've both got practical experience here. I know. So what I've learned is if you're changing the model, so let's say you've decided to work with Gemini or ChatGPT, and then you've decided actually version 2 of my release, I'm gonna switch model to a different model. And that's actually a big issue, right? Because you've let the models all behave slightly differently. So, and what we do, and that's one thing. And the other thing is you don't control the releases of the models. So the models are being released all the time by these big frontier companies, and they're deprecating models over time. So I don't know what the models that were available 12 months ago from ChatGPT, are they even available anymore as a hosted service? So there's kind of two quandaries here. One is switching models midway through building something, and then models being deprecated at quite a rapid pace. So that's very hard for an IT department, isn't it, to kind of keep pace with them. You guys have learned lessons here probably from this, because I know you've both experimented with different models over time for different projects.
Yeah, definitely. I think not just models, different companies, but models within the same company are obviously completely different. If you just to try and prompt just in a normal Claude chat interface with Sonnet versus Opus, you'll get very different kind of responses, very different kind of thinking levels and quality, quite frankly. But it's a cost trade-off. That's fundamentally the big thing as well with these models. If it can get done by Sonnet, for instance, from Anthropic, and get done well, then you're much better off using that than using the sledgehammer that is Opus as a massive model. But if you're doing some in-depth coding, like the kind of stuff that Ralph's been doing recently, then you probably want Opus all day, if you can afford it, right? So I think there's a big trade-off to be done. The deprecation thing is an interesting one. I was just about to look up whether you can still get all the older models via API, or whether they just get deprecated in like chat interfaces and stuff. I'm sure they last longer than they do.
But the cycle is what the issue is. I'm reading is the cycle is quite quick. So you're used to in IT, you're used to kind of, let's just take Microsoft Windows back in the day. You knew you had about 10 years to think about a replacement cycle. With this stuff, we're talking less than 12 months. And it's asked, and the questions being asked around hosted models. So companies, I think like Oracle, who will host a model and give you a little bit more continuity and consistency. But then, of course, you're not getting. You then determine the pace at which you want to release and take advantage of new models. So it is a bit of a topic at the moment because of the speed of change. And I know in my job, it's the discussion also is how do you test these things? Because if you're doing customer-facing bots, or it doesn't matter whether it's front office, back office, but how do you test this thing and this combination of deterministic versus probabilistic and token consumption and token and economics.
Yeah. Well, just one quick comment before, obviously, Ralph, you've got things to say here, but I was just looking at the Anthropic site, and sure enough, they retire them at a rapid rate, right? They don't call it necessarily deprecated, they call it retired. But even like Opus 4, we have to go back to 3.5 kind of thing to get to something that's retired. But, that wasn't that long ago, right? Not in IT terms, as you say.
Yeah, and I think it's even somewhat more complicated because if we go back to, it was GPT 5.0, I think it was, there was anyway one of the releases where they really changed how the model behaved. And of course, people had grown such an attachment to ChatGPT in the state as it was. And so we saw just an enormous amount of backlash about the fact that people had a visceral disconnect from this relationship that they had built up. They had actually become friends with the model, and suddenly this thing changed and it was talking in a different way, behaving in a different way, and it didn't feel like that long, lost friend that they were always conversing with. And I actually think this is something for us to bear in mind. And then the other aspect of it is you can change that experience even with an existing model just by changing the system prompt. And this is something IT departments have control over. And so obviously you might look at, actually we're not quite getting the right result. Let's tweak the system prompt. Suddenly your agent is responding in a very different way again. And so I think we've got multiple levers that really do shift what people end up experiencing. And I think the other point to bear in mind here is that for a lot of IT departments, they really need to consider somewhat how to be agnostic of model. So cost is a major factor. If we look at the Chinese models like DeepSeek and Qwen, so I have a particular implementation where I'm only using DeepSeek and Qwen. And those models are hugely lower in price in terms of their token usage than anything that you will get from ChatGPT or indeed from Anthropic. So I think there's a lot of considerations here, and I think we just have to accept it's not possible to entirely control the behavior and the experience. But obviously, what people do have access to is context. What they do have access to is that system prompt, and I think this is what IT departments really have to own, because that's where you can control the brand experience for the consumer.
Yeah, 100%. Let's move on to the retail applications here. Rob, there's a few news stories that caught your eye in the last kind of 3-4 weeks. Do you want to just rattle through kind of what you've seen and kind of what observations you've made on the impact in retail?
Yeah. Just quickly, because a couple of them are kind of follow on from the first episode. So we talked a bit in the first episode about UCP, Unified Commerce Protocol, which is a protocol that allows lots of retailers to connect to agents to allow agentic purchasing. One of the big news 2 weeks ago was that Amazon, who had been very standoffish from these protocols for many months, well, for the whole time basically, because they like to keep their ecosystem pretty closed, did a big signal by joining the UCP Council, which is a council of companies that support and develop UCP. I mean, for me, this is just a big sign that they want to own commerce end to end. They have that weight. Ralph was talking about it earlier. They have this massive catalogue. They have a lot of lock-in. Is Amazon basically the first place I go to look for almost anything? It's not far off, right? Unless it's a particular brand that I know that I have to go direct for. And at the same time, Rufus, their AI, last month was 115% up on month active users. And that's not from a low base anymore. That's from a reasonable base. So I think Amazon's making a lot of moves at the moment in a direction of dominance. Let's kind of put it that way. And there's not all that many people that can fight them, right? I think in the US, you would argue Walmart's got a pretty strong position within the market. But if you think about the UK or many European countries, I just don't think there's many people that have much of a weight to fight this. So I mean that was one in particular. Craig.
I'll comment on that. So back in November last year, Amazon started suing Perplexity. They said that the Comet browser was covertly accessing customer accounts, bypassing security and making purchases on behalf of customers. So you do wonder if they've reflected internally that their posture towards how they play in this world has changed a little bit, but in light of the fact that people are going to find a way anyway. And certainly when I signed up for Claude Cowork 2 months ago and I took the subscription, bit the bullet, the first experiment I did was like, go shopping for me. I want to buy a belt, under £30, brown, men's. I gave it 5 websites. I said, go off. And I watched the browser. I just sat back. It was very slow because it had to work out the UI for each site. But it was shopping for me. And I came back and it gave me actually a Google sheet of all of the belts it identified with links to the product detail page.
The irony of Amazon suing Perplexity, though, is that they also have introduced technology called Buy For Me, where you can give it any kind of link to another e-commerce site and they'll use your Amazon details, your address, your payment, all that kind of stuff, to go on that site and purchase as a guest. So, it's a little bit kind of, how do you sue Perplexity for the same thing you're doing to other people? I just think they're just exhibiting their normal route, right? Which is a dominate route. I haven't seen them do much else these days, but it's something for retailers to bear in mind, because it means that they need more defensibility, depending on what sector or products that they.
Yeah, something I predicted a few years ago was when the LLMs came out was the if you were a massive marketplace, you're building these marketplaces. The marketplaces replaced department stores, right? And department stores started to die, and there's a few left that were kind of had differentiation. If you're going to get an agent to do shopping for you across the entire internet, you don't necessarily need a marketplace that brings together a set of different products. You can just use the entire catalogue in the world across all the world's warehouses and get an agent to just figure it out for you. So you're not restricted by whatever that department store or marketplace carries. So I do think there's more to come on that, and there's more disruption. There was disruption to department stores with marketplaces, and now there's disruption to marketplaces with AI agents.
One final thing I'd add to that thought is that technically that's much harder than it sounds. The idea that an agent has access to the entire of the world's catalogue, because like Ralph was saying about context windows before, we're amazed at the moment where a context window can hold an entire code base, let alone the entire catalogue of the world, to give answers quickly and inexpensively. So I think there's a whole set of layers of technical infrastructure underneath that that will need to be developed to be able to genuinely have that kind of full view. But we are on the way, that's for sure.
Yeah, getting it to do a bit of read. I think what the journey, the customer journey would be: I'm going to buy a bicycle. I'm going to go riding, I don't know, 100 miles every week, a couple of times a week. Go and research for me. Go and figure out what the best models might be, and bring me a list of kind of products that meet those requirements that you're recommending. And give me a list, and then I'll make a purchasing decision. So it'll be more scenario based. I'm decorating my home. I want you to. This is a photo of my interior. This is kind of the style I want. I want you to go and have a look. Yes, you've got to have context, and you've got to know where to find the products and that whole stack that you talked about, Rob. But I think in certain scenarios, that's how you're gonna shop, isn't it? You're gonna get when you've got to do a lot of research. It takes a lot of time, right, to research for things like buying a bicycle or buying a motor car. And the agent will go off and do that. But in certain other categories, it's much more visual, right? It's much more, you enjoy the experience of buying because it's visual. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see how that unfolds and how the stack changes, and what do marketplaces look like in 10 years' time? What does Amazon look like in 10 years' time?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things I saw this week was SAP's CEO, I think it was on an earnings call, said that these ERP AI migration tools are a must-have because customers want to see the cost coming down. I thought that was a really quite public admission of enterprise software being far too expensive and needing to go in a different direction. So, I mean, we've obviously seen a lot of enterprise software go from seat-based to consumption-based, and now lots more of them are talking about outcome-based, if they can tighten up what the outcome really means. But I mean, we're seeing this a lot with our commerce customers in retail. They do want to re-platform sometimes, especially from legacy platforms, but they don't want the cost of the re-platform, and they don't have to anymore because AI can do a lot of the heavy lifting. One of the things we've seen with the AI models is that they've got very good at front-end development. Relatively simple front-end development, which is effectively what an e-commerce site is. It's not rocket science, right? They can do a lot of the heavy lifting if you just feed it a design from a tool like Figma. We've been doing that quite a lot, and get it to do a lot of that heavy lifting of the interface creation. And we can still have humans in the loop to check the code. But we know in the past few months, Ralph, maybe 6 months, I don't know, mainly since Opus, right? Opus kind of 4, that kind of era, they know code probably better than 75% of developers. I don't know, I'm going to throw that stat out there. It's completely unfounded, but I feel like we definitely turned the point of it being an assistant to it being capable of proper work.
Ralph, you've spent the last year. You and I saw how we started the talking on our kind of on our chat group, but you've experienced this firsthand, the development of coding. You're not a coder, right? It's not been your profession, but you learned to code a little bit through AI, and you built systems with AI. And when I first started talking to you a year ago, every time I spoke to you, you were tearing your hair out because you're like, "Oh my god, I've just built this amazing thing and it's gone and destroyed itself." But now you're super productive with building with AI.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting moment because we have almost got a perfect crystal ball in front of us. The future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I was just reading today a guy saying, if a developer came to me and said he'd built 4,000 lines of code using AI, I would fire him. And I really had to laugh because it was in response to somebody that said, I just had my AI construct 4,000 lines of code. I can tell you I've delivered 85,000 lines of code in the last week. And that has probably been the production rate for the last 12 weeks. And that wasn't possible just a year ago. A year ago, these systems were falling over themselves and tearing themselves apart, as you said, and I've had everything go wrong. Now it just works, and especially with Claude Code. Actually, if I look at just this week, what I've been able to stand up in terms of infrastructure, I'm talking about industrial strength infrastructure with hosting and databases, pretty much every service that you could want that actually provides you with scalable e-commerce infrastructure. And it's standing it up in 4 hours. Just 3 months ago, that was taking me 2 days to stand up. Now, in the last week, I've actually just done a project end to end. It took 4 hours to stand up all of the infrastructure that I could basically run Netflix off. So, this is kind of how stuff has moved on. And just as Rob was saying, so much can now be actually, just fully coded with AI. Now, there are a lot of people out there that say, absolutely no way. I would never get a job as an engineer or a developer in those companies. But I can tell you that I have been running projects for clients very successfully where the code runs, and we have got some very advanced security evaluations and all kinds of services that run on a daily basis to make sure that this thing is as secure and as performant as it can be. And I think, even maybe to greater extent than what we would do if we were doing all of that manually. And so I do think the world has moved on. And if you look at, I'm going to bring up Temu, because I think Temu for me has been one of the biggest success stories in retail. Whatever you make of Temu, I think what they were able to do is something that I have never seen Amazon able to do. They create a real relationship with the customers based on products that they want, the degree of personalization, and their ability to actually remember what you've been browsing, what you've been buying, their ability to encourage you to have 100 products sitting there in your cart that you haven't yet checked out. It's essentially your wish list. It's just one button away. If they could just get you to press it, then you will have bought another 100 products. I can tell you, my Amazon, I used to use it in that way. Maybe I had 3 or 4 products. Temu, I actually had to stop using it because it was just too bloody good. So I think, retail has quite a long way to go in terms of innovation. And I think we can look to retailers like Temu that have really cracked it in terms of gamification, but also personalization and really understanding what you want. And I think where we're going to end up, we're just, a moment away where essentially all websites are, we disintermediate them. So we've aggregated them out of the picture. They're just a catalog. And of course, Salesforce has announced that it's going to make available a headless mode. That means you can interact with all of Salesforce content via an API. You don't actually have to log in to the application anymore. And I think this is where we're going. Imagine Amazon was, in fact, not a catalog website, but actually you could run it in headless mode. You could connect to it via API. And what they really kind of decided to add value on was the curation of the products that your agents could then browse based on your needs. And They could make the best prices available, make the data available in the best possible way, innovate new services on the basis of sharing that information that is kind of agent ready instead of the crap website experience that you get today with Amazon. And so I think, this is the thing. Now, Temu on the other side, it's gamified shopping. I actually quite enjoy going on there. Sometimes I get a bit irritated with all the freebies that I have to get through before I can actually start shopping. But nonetheless, it does keep me on the site for an extra 10 minutes. And they've got some really clever ways to influence the consumer behavior. So I think, we have to start thinking about how we can create richer services through providing information. I think the website still has a role to play, but actually how we provision information to aggregators that are really going to, never look at our website, that are actually going to be able to grab that data via API. And so what can a retailer do to make sure that their API is the one that gets picked first, that the data that they are serving is richer than anything else, and that obviously allows consumers to make more informed decisions. And maybe even, somehow earn the respect of the agents that are out there consuming on your behalf, that they become the first choice. And I think the last point I'll mention is, with Gen Z, retailers really need to earn the right to be a brand that supplies them. And I think this is something that we still need to focus on. And maybe that becomes more important from a brand experience point of view, is communicating that value proposition, not just relying on a website to do that. And that means taking to social media in new ways that really, allow your customers to select the brand based on what you stand for. And that maybe is, where we're moving. So much more consumer behavior and psychology at play, and social media hopefully really coming into its own, where you can actually create the gravitas of what your brand experience is about.
And you mentioned, and Rob, Ralph, you mentioned short reference there to Salesforce. And I know, Rob, you've got some opinions on this around, so you had all this kind of drama about SaaS companies and what will SaaS companies be in the future, given that agents actually will become the user interface in some scenarios. Some of the doom mongers are always like to create stories in like tabloid-like stories where they say there will never be a user interface, but I don't think anyone really agrees that the user interface, the graphical user interface, will disappear completely. But agents are going to do things with SaaS technology platforms that they weren't doing before, because agents don't need to use a user interface, do they? So what's this headless 360 thing all about? You're a sales partner, Rob. What do you make of that? And why is Salesforce? Why is this co-founder of Salesforce, Parker Harris, saying I don't need to log onto Salesforce anymore?
Well, I think it's quite astute, right? I think the more if you're like in the denial camp, if you're one of the enterprise software people that are like, no, you still need enterprise software and it won't change as fast as you think and blah blah blah, and then first of all you're reasonably wrong, right? The amount of time that it's going to take, who knows, but it's certainly going to go that direction. Of the obvious thing, we built user interfaces to act as a go-between between what we want to accomplish and what the computer can do, right? It was a link. And if you can start talking in natural language or typing in natural language or whatever you want to do, that is much more native to how we interact and work, and that still works, then you definitely don't need the interface, right? I mean, it's a relatively simple statement, and people can try and pick holes in that, but in the end, it's pretty much a truth. I don't see what the problem is. Anything to do with validation can be done, and then it can be talked back. It's just it's going to happen, and that's why I think one of the big things that Salesforce is betting on is that actually Slack is the interface that you'll use to get work done. That's what they want to happen, and every enterprise company has their equivalent of where they want the work to be done, right? And the reason for that is that you can talk in Slack with voice, you can type into it, you can get together as humans, and the agents can listen, and they can all be plugged in, and but the whole part of that comes out the other end is kind of trust, enterprise trust, data security, all of those different pieces. And eventually you get down to a buy or build discussion, which we've been having forever in IT. It's always been a buy or build discussion, depending on what the particular piece of kit is. And we're still going to have it. AI enables you to build it more than ever, but you can still build something bad. You can still build something in the wrong direction, just like before. And so I still think a lot of people will buy, but they want all of the stuff that AI brings with it, the lack of interface and all of those kind of different things. So this headless 360 side of it, which is basically, Salesforce has always had an API. It's always been a very API-led kind of business. You've been able to do loads of stuff using the API forever, right? All they've really done, I suppose, is wrap that in agentic friendliness, MCP, and all these kind of things, so that it's much more usable inside AI, which is what they had to do to be the open company that they are now. And you see every one of these enterprise companies being more open. Salesforce, you can bring your own model, you can bring your own kind of, you can connect data sources like Snowflake and all these different things. The past 5 years have been fascinating because they keep opening the kimono more and more. Yes, use your own stuff. Yes, that's fine. As long as they maintain the kind of enterprise trust, scalability, and like system of record kind of thing. So I don't know. I think it's a really interesting time, but I think it does come down to buy versus build. Ralph, I know you do a lot of building, but some people are still buying, right? I
think it's important to buy as well, because at the end of the day, you're not just buying the feature set, you're buying the maintenance of the feature set.
Yeah.
And you're really buying into the people that are evolving the feature set. And I think this is really the key. Now, you might not have a defensible moat because people could build it. We know people that are not buying software, they're going away and building it. And I think they don't necessarily appreciate what comes along with that in terms of the maintenance, and also what comes along with actually the innovation. I just recently stopped a build because I realized that Claude Code could actually do it all with inside Claude Code. I didn't need the application. And I think this is partly the other side of it. What we really need is the collaborative ability. And I think if you are maintaining connectors, if you're making it easy to connect to data sets, then that makes you desirable. At the front end, the UI doesn't. And I think, probably what we're going to see as the AI experience evolves is that UI will be created on the fly. I don't think we need permanent static UI. UI will be created on the fly. Imagine I scrape. Okay, I won't use the word scrape. Retailers hate the word scrape. But imagine I use an API to actually collect products that I'm interested in. I can actually build an interface that represents those products for me, specific to that product set, that is actually comparing the different aspects and features and use cases, and that is completely personalized to the product and to my specific use case. I don't need somebody else to build the front end for me. My agent can surface the front end. What I need is the data. What I need is the pricing. What I need is the reliability of service that can actually get me access to that information. And I know that there is some tension here. Retailers want to create an experience, and this won't be for everybody. But, Craig, you said the UI won't disappear. Well, do I really need to see a picture of milk or bread? If I know I want a 2-liter bottle of milk, from a supermarket point of view, I don't actually need to see the photo of it. I just need to buy the milk by the liter. Obviously, if we're talking fashion, we very much want to see the product. And I think that's a very different experience. So we're going to have this tension for quite some time. Retailers want to create the experience. They think that's actually through the website or in store. But, increasingly, people will be using agentic software and LLMs to be doing that browsing for them, and they'll be surfacing the products, in a UI experience that they will have customized for themselves.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting stuff there. Like, there's already a business that I came across when I was at NRF this year called Spangle AI, and they're already on the fly building website experiences based on how, what search query you kind of landed with from what search engine and where, and you know what I mean, and your location and whatnot. And so that's already happening, and I think it's an obvious next step, right, on that kind of personalization thing. But I still do think that brands need a place to craft their kind of message and kind of, what a new season launch is, or all of those kind of things. And I agree with you, social media has a part to play there. But I think web interfaces are still so versatile that the idea that you can serve up these web interfaces to customers is much better than just like an email, for instance. Emails suck. You can't do a lot with an email, but you can do a lot with a website.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. There's a lot ahead, isn't there, Craig?
I think one of the general purpose technologies that have made a big difference in the last 4 or 5 years is lake houses. The big issue in retail, we talked about personalization for 20 years since the internet really kicked off, and all these vendors offered one-to-one personalization, but no one delivered it. And the problem was the customer left all these signals across all the digital touch points, and sometimes in store, like if you were using loyalty, you had all these signals you were leaving, but you weren't really doing much. You weren't deriving in that much intent from it. You didn't quite figure out, okay, so they're doing this, and this. That must mean they're going to be moving house shortly, or they've just moved into a house and they're going to be decorating it. They weren't very good at it. All they would do is like if rudimentary customers that looked at this also bought this, or I've noticed you're looking at speedos, so I'm going to show you some more speedos. It wasn't very good. Now because of the power of these systems, the amount of the volume, the variety of kind of data and the velocity, the pure scale of these systems, you can now make sense of real-time signals and actually do something more meaningful. You couldn't do that 5 years ago. So now you've got that. You apply that to kind of you leverage that data and with machine learning, and you say actually what is the right format of, I don't know, front end to show the customer at this moment in time, because I've been able to process the volume of data now, which I couldn't do 5 years ago. So I think that's actually one of the more interesting topics, and AI is that's just context. It can now give you the context, and now AI can run on top of that with that context and deliver a much more suitable experience. So that, I think it's fascinating too. We're just going to wrap up with like a final topic here, which is kind of we're going to go into a quick deep dive of Nexite, which is really interesting technology that, Ralph, you've got some experience with. Before we get into that, we're just going to talk about traditional RFID before we talk about Nexite. The final story is UPS have completed a RFID labeling rollout across the 5,500 UPS store locations in the US. So that's about 1.3 million RFID tagged packages every single day. So every package that drops at a UPS store now enters the network with an RFID label attached, which means shippers, carriers, and retailers get the real-time visibility. So that's a scale that we haven't seen before in UPS, which is quite interesting. Ralph, you found something, you've discovered a technology that's even more interesting. It's kind of based on solves some of the problems that RFID was always out there to solve, but an alternative approach using Bluetooth. Do you want to just talk us in our kind of deep dive topic about Nexite?
Yeah, I think Nexite is really leading this next evolution of in-store experience with actually something called the Nano BT tag. And this thing is very special because it obviously lives on every garment, every product in the store. And what it's able to do is ping a reader every 30 seconds to tell it its location. And so that's incredibly powerful because you can actually get a completely live map of where everything in your store is. But more importantly than this, it starts to give you the same level of functionality that you have in terms of analyzing visits to your e-commerce site. So, obviously one of the things that the way I describe this to people is, so tell me, what features you have on your e-commerce site and how you can actually analyze what the customer behavior is. And they tell me, we can actually see the dwell time and we can actually see what they've clicked on and we can see what they've bought together. And then I say, well, imagine you turned all of that off. What would that be like? And of course, they kind of get this ashen look on their face and they go, that would be terrible. We wouldn't be able to trade. And this is how we run our stores. Well, this is how we used to have to run our stores until Nexite really came along to give us incredibly high fidelity of information. And this technology is so smart that we can actually see which products have basically been seen by the customer, so it can actually track when customers are standing in front of a fixture. It knows exactly what products are in those fixtures, and it tags them as seen. It knows which products have been picked up. It knows which products have been picked up and taken to the fitting room. It knows which products have been obviously tried on and converted to sale. It knows exactly where in the in-store funnel the transaction has failed, so where there's been friction. And obviously, if products are abandoned somewhere in that process, the technology is actually able, through some incredibly clever AI algorithms, it's actually able to start to look at products were abandoned. So, for example, if there is actually stock available in all the sizes on the floor and product is being abandoned in the fitting room, then it can actually look whether the same behavior is happening in other stores. And through that, it can really triangulate whether there's a fit issue or a quality issue. And so this is incredibly powerful for head office teams, because for the first time they can see, obviously they can always see sales, but for the first time they can see, why they aren't getting sales, and even why those sales are happening, where they're happening. So are the consumers picking the product up and immediately taking it to a cash desk and completing the transaction, or whether it always goes to a fitting room. The technology is so smart that it can even tell which products are going to the fitting room together, which one was picked up first, which one was picked up second, and obviously what order they are converting in. And this level of insight is absolutely a game changer if you are really looking to drive a kind of a trading environment where you're able to really trade your stores, not just merchandise product, but actually trade the stores. And what we've been able to see is that the kind of information that it gives, let's say a store associate, a retail associate, is just which products aren't converting. And it gives them instruction, if you're in visual merchandising, for example, which products would benefit from being highlighted, which zones are hot, which zones aren't hot, and then work within your visual merchandising guidelines to actually move product around the store, to optimize it, to put products on mannequins, to take it off mannequins. So there's this concept of kind of driving upgrades and downgrades. This is intelligent retail at the next level. And I think that the insight that is starting to come through the actual app, there's a very nice app that is provided to the stores, and it basically gives them a money map where they can actually see the entire layout of the store with all of the fixtures and exactly where customers are interacting and where they're not, and where, what's actually driving the picks, what's driving the sales. And so optimizing the store layout on the basis of that information is now, a much smarter experience. It's not just based on somebody's opinion, which was so often the case. I don't like the way that fixture looks, but actually now you can optimize the fixture. And we have really seen through experiments with clients that, even kind of myth and law of just how retail should be executed in the store, some of the contradictory advice and recommendations that they've received from the technology have borne out. And we've seen increases in conversion. And so you can actually experiment now in ways that you can actually evaluate the ROI of every single merchandising decision. And where the technology is going next is really starting to give head office staff the opportunity to validate buys. So even in season, what products should they be doing repeat buys on? What color way, is being picked up in the store but not converting? And so this really helps to validate some of the in-season decisions. And I think next, it's evolving to actually start to provide pre-season intelligence as well. And so obviously you can do all the things you can with RFID, the promise of accurate inventory and being able to receive stock in the store. The minute it arrives in store, it's already visible on the stock file because the readers actually pick up these nano BT tags, and they don't have batteries, which is incredible. They get energized by the signal from the readers, and we have got these exciters that go in store that charge them up. That means we can get really, really high, 98%, 99% of products are actually picked up. And this is the game changer from RFID. RFID, has an expensive infrastructure. This has a similar infrastructure. It's a little bit cheaper, but you get much stronger visibility. And so the fact that you can really now, for the first time, manage the funnel experience, you can actually monitor it in the same way that you would on an e-commerce website. That for me is just game changing, and I'm really enjoying the experience of seeing what clients are doing with it. And it's an incredible opportunity right now to start changing the experience, not just for the store staff, but actually for customers.
Sounds like Google Analytics for stores.
It's way beyond that, because I think Google Analytics, I kind of log into once a week to have a look at my analytics. This is live. It's telling you literally, you can see how much of your stock is currently walking around in the store. So if you wanted, that blue, tank top in a small size, and you looked on the heat map that's in the app, you would literally be able to see where that product is. It's not on the shelf, it's not behind the cash desk, it's not in the fitting room. Actually, it's wandering around the back of the store with a customer. And of course, that's unheard of. Now, where that does lead to strong conversion is when you're actually looking for the product and it is on the fitting room rail, or it's been returned and it's sitting behind the cash desk, and suddenly you're able to locate it, which means you can convert. And this is what's really driving sales. So I think it's even better than anything like Google Analytics, which is kind of more of a passive observation. This is complete active trading of exactly where the product is. And I think for the first time, you're able to, retailers are, especially fashion retailers, are obsessed with min-max. And how much stock do I actually need to have on the shelf? How do I make sure that I don't have broken colorways and broken sizes? This actually tells you, at any one time, what is in a journey, on a customer journey around the store, not just physically what is in the store, but where is it? And I think that just allows you to consider your on-shelf availability. And again, I just use this word fidelity because that's what it is. It's just incredible fidelity. Every 30 seconds, getting a ping of where that product is. It's incredible for, just kind of managing anti-theft solutions and obviously just evaluating the consumer behavior. You can literally see everywhere that product has traveled as the customer has made their journey through the store.
And Ralph, the barrier in RFID was cost per tag, which came down. So I know that more people are adopting RFID because of cost per tag, and it was in the UK. It was M&S were one of the pioneers, and there were a few that started to adopt it in later years. We're seeing more and more RFID now. So now that there's more and more RFID because the tags have gone down, this sounds like a more expensive technology, but the benefits are much broader. That is, from what you've just said, there's more use cases, there's more business value, but the tag is probably a little bit more expensive because they haven't got the volume, presumably the production volume that you'd have in RFID, which is a bit more ubiquitous. Is that right?
Well, I think the thing here is, that you're looking at, even for the early stages, a 6% improvement in in-store revenue. And the incremental revenue that this is driving is proven. And so I think for most retailers, they need to have a product that probably has a cost price north of, let's say, €25 or £25 to make it work. But we are seeing that there is a consistent opportunity to take incremental revenue as a result of this data sets. The technology really does pay for itself. And I think the other thing is, we are measuring such a small range of the use cases where we can actually attribute sales directly to the technology. We've had customers saying that the ability to consistently maintain high levels of visual merchandising guidelines, so just the implementation is so much more consistent, and that alone makes the stores look sharper and customers respond. And I think this is the thing, it drives a completely different behavior from your staff. Implementation is way more consistent, and really exactly what stores are actually implementing in terms of the upgrades, the downgrades, the highlights. And that's really powerful in terms of getting, just high value for the productivity. We know that store staff, probably one of your biggest costs other than the rent. And so maximizing the productivity of your store staff, I think this is, all stuff that we haven't even taken fully into account.
Yeah, great. Sounds really exciting. So hopefully we're going to see more and more of this across the UK retail over the next year or two. With that, we've kind of come to the end of the show. We've kind of finished our deep dive, and hopefully that's been a useful episode for those people trying to stay abreast with what's going on in this extremely fast-moving technology world. And we'll be back in about 3 or 4 weeks' time with our third show. But thank you, Rob, and thank you, Ralph, for your time today. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the Retail Innovation Podcast in the June edition. So see you guys next time.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Rob.